Let's just pick up the crusade. The first crusade, 1096, second crusade in the 1140s. And so we're looking at the 11 and 1200s today. That's our time frame for what's going on just post the first crusade and what happens over the next 200 to 250 years. In the 12th and 13th century in Europe, life was precarious. It didn't matter whether you were wealthy or poor. It was a time in which most babies died before their first birthday. All right, of diseases that we easily cure today. It was common that babies would die in their first year. That's why the celebration at the time of weaning was such an important event, because if they made it to that point, they were likely to live to 50 or 60 years old. I mean, when you look back, you look back on history and you see that the average lifespan was 40 or 45. That takes into account that the great majority died in the first year. So people were living. If you lived until you were a year old, it was likely you're going to make it to 60. And you had a good shot. And so but nonetheless, they weren't living the kinds of lifespans we encounter, and disease was common. And so what you had is a time of fear and anxiety. Death is always around you. Babies are dying. People are dying of diseases. They didn't have the sanitation that we have today. And so it's all too easy in such a world to blame them. Somebody did it. The people who are not like us. For every tragedy, every hardship, every loss, somebody is at fault. And during this time, as we've talked about, the Jews began to be labeled as the devil's children. And so where is the accusation going to go by nature? At the Jews. Millions of Christians during the time began to believe that the Jews were not actually human beings. They were creatures of the devil, allies of Satan, and personifications of the Antichrist. And once you've done this dehumanization as a characterization, it renders plausible every possible accusation that could be made. Once you dehumanize somebody, anything is possible. And so as agents of Satan, the Jews were accused of conspiring to destroy anything Christian. 3 basic anti-Jewish libels were circulated by the medieval clergy and easily accepted by the large majority of Christians. Okay, and so that's where we're going to start today, is with the libels. All right. 1, Jews murdered Christians. That's the first libel. And drank their blood for ritual purposes. Number 1. Number 2, Jews poisoned Christians. Number 3, and this one develops a little bit later, Jews kidnap the wafer that is transubstantiated into the body of Jesus, and they stick needles into it, thus torturing Jesus once again. All right, those are the 3. Each of these 3 charges are made and believed despite lack of any kind of evidence. Obviously, you're not going to find evidence because they're not true, but that didn't seem to matter, because what happened is if you tortured a person long enough, somebody would admit to something. Okay? So in the absence of information, the absence of evidence did not fool the Christians. They knew better. Once you have a belief, you don't need support. And, you have this today with the COVID and all that's going on with that. People who don't believe it exists, go prove it. All right, it's hard to prove. So let's start out with the first. The beginnings of the charge of ritual murder, which had its beginnings in an incident that took place in the 12th century. Good Friday, 1144, just before the Second Crusade, a forester stumbles upon a corpse of a young boy named William in the woods outside of Norwich, England. According to a book that's written a number of years later by Thomas of Monmouth, and you'll see in a second he plays a major role here, we have reading number 1. Gail, you're the first square, you get to read. Reading number 1.
Becoming aware that the boy had been treated with unusual cruelty, the forester now began to suspect from the manner of his treatment that it was no Christian, but in very truth a Jew who had ventured to slaughter an innocent child of this kind with such horrible barbarity.
Right, only somebody who's not human could have engaged in this kind of action. All right. William's relatives agreed with the forester. They needed a reason. They've lost their child. His uncle describes a dream that his wife had had a few weeks earlier in which Jews had attacked her in the marketplace and tore off one of her legs. And what's the interpretation of this? It's a warning that she would lose a loved one because of the Jews. Now, what happens retrospectively, whether or not she had the dream, etc., all this is being reported years later. Most people in the city of Norwich ignored the charges initially, and they attributed it to the grief of the loss of a child. After all, Jews had been living in the city for 100 years without any kind of incidents, and so you have no other proof. William is buried. Life in Norwich continues as usual until 1149, 5 years after the death of the child, when Thomas of Monmouth comes to live in a monastery in the area. Thomas becomes obsessed with this murder. He is convinced that William was not a victim of random violence, but a martyr who died for his faith. And he writes a book about William's death, hoping to have the boy declared a saint. Thomas's book is based on 4 stories told by 4 people. All right, so here are the stories that he reports, okay? 1, the first story is a deathbed confession by Aylward Dead, one of the richest men in Norwich. In 1149, 5 years after the death, Aylward told a priest that he had seen a Jew named Eleazar and another man walking with a horse early on the day that William's body was discovered. On the horse was a huge sack which Aylward touched, and within he felt a human body. When the 2 men realized that Aylward knew their secret, he claims they fled into the woods with the sack. That's story number 1. And again, 5 years later. Number 2, Thomas's second story came from the aunt, the one who had the dream, who now came forward to say that William had come to see her on the day of his disappearance. With him was a cook who offered William a job. Suspicious of the cook, the aunt asked her daughter to follow the pair when they left. And the little girl told her that William and the cook entered Eleazar's house and the door closed behind them. Story number 3. Thomas then found a witness, quote unquote, this time a Christian woman who in 1144 had worked for Eleazar, the Jewish man, as a servant. She claimed that on the day that William disappeared, Eleazar had ordered her to bring him a big pot of boiling water. When he carried the pot into another room, she peeked through a crack, at which point she saw a boy tied to a post. The 4th story, the most prized and yet at the same time the most ridiculous and most amazing, testimony comes from a monk by the name of Theobald, who was nowhere near Norwich in 1144. Theobald told Thomas that he had been born a Jew, okay, and had converted to Christianity because of William's martyrdom. He claimed, this is amazing, that he and every other Jew in England in 1144 knew that a boy would be killed in Norwich on Good Friday. According to Theobald, prominent Jews gathered in Spain just before Passover every year to determine where a Christian child would be sacrificed. Jews who lived in the selected country then drew lots to decide exactly where the crime would take place. In 1144, according to Theobald, England was the country selected and Norwich the town. Go prove the null set, right? It didn't strike Thomas as surprising that no one had ever revealed such a secret, with the single exception of Theobald. Nobody else had ever spoken about this. According to Theobald, Jews were willing to risk their lives through such an action to show their contempt for Christianity and to take revenge for the exile from their homeland. And then Thomas himself, Thomas of Monmouth, adds his own twist to Theobald's tale. He insisted that Jews did more than just kill their victims, they reenact the crucifixion of Jesus. In his book, he describes the scene as he imagined it. Reading number 2. Rhody, do you have the text? Would you do us the honors?
The Jews laid their blood-stained hands upon the innocent victim, and having lifted him from the ground, and having fastened him upon the cross, they vied with one another in their efforts to make an end of him. In doing these things, they were adding pang to pang and wound to wound, and yet were not able to satisfy their heartless cruelty and their inborn hatred of the Christian nation. Lo, after these many and great tortures, they inflicted a frightful wound in his left side, reaching even to his heart, and as though to make an end of all, they extinguished his mortal life so far as it was in their power. And since many streams of blood were running down from all parts of his body, then to stop the blood and to wash and close the wounds, they poured boiling water over him.
Okay. This guy must have been something special, this writer. Unbelievable. The 12th century, the accusations of ritual murder did not seem outrageous to the large population. It seemed instead to confirm what they already believed about Jews and Judaism. It fit the demonic possession concept. It fit the belief that Jews were responsible for the crucifixion. When William died, the Crusades had been going on for 50 years. Speeches and sermons had already demonized the Jews and encouraged people to join the Crusades and blame the Jews and the Muslims for the loss of Jerusalem and any attacks on their beliefs. Whatever the motives of Thomas of Monmouth, these rumors spread like wildfire. They reinforce the image of the Jew. There's this building and rebuilding and replaying the image. The rumors exist. Something comes out to say they did it. It just reinforces and continues to reinforce the process. Jews are evil. They are depraved. They have such hatred for Christians that they will stop at nothing. Thomas's accusations of ritual murder are not the last made against the Jews in any way. In 1147, right around the same time, Christians in Würzburg, Germany, accused Jews of murdering a Christian. 1168, similar charges are made in England, and the same happened a few years later in Paris. The Jews of Blois, a town in France, were those who also made such accusations. On a spring day in 1171, so we're talking about 22 years after Thomas of Monmouth began his process, a Jewish tanner was walking along the banks of the Loire River. He's carrying a bundle of animal hides when he encounters the servant of a town official. As the two men pass each other, one of the skins, the animal skins, drops out of the tanner's bundle and falls into the river. The servant immediately assumes it's a human corpse and runs to tell his master. The Count of Blois accepts the story as fact and imprisons all Jewish adults in the city and orders that their children be baptized as Christians. On May 26th, the adults who he had put in prison were given a choice: conversion or death. 8 or 9 of them accepted the conversion and were baptized. The rest were herded into a hut and burned alive. Now, not everyone was believing that. You're going to see here the difference between the mob mentality and the leadership play out again. When the Jews appeal to the Count of Champagne, who's the brother of the Count of Blois. Okay, so the Count is the one who imprisoned everybody. His brother they appeal to him. He responds by publicly saying, we find nowhere in Jewish law that it is permissible to kill a Christian. When charges of ritual murder are made in the lands, he refused in his own lands to act on those charges. So there were some leaders who didn't respond in the same way. By the end of the 12th century, by the end of the 1100s, Christians in 8 cities had accused Jews of ritual murder. By the end of the 13th century, that number had tripled. As accusations increased, so did the false belief that Jews routinely engage in this practice of ritual murder. It's not just an action of some Jew doing this. This is a routine. And when you make an accusation repeatedly, it tends to get believed no matter what the facts are. You just continue to say something over and over, it is accepted. There's an assumption that where there is smoke, there is fire. 1255, a 5-year-old boy is found dead in a well in Lincoln, England. The Christians of Lincoln are absolutely convinced that the Jews had murdered him and thrown his body into the well. The officials of Lincoln immediately charge a specific individual, a Jew known as Copin, who lived nearby. They torture him until he confessed. And once he had confessed, they arrested all the Jews in the city. Like William of Norwich, young Hugh became a saint. And his story, like William's, ultimately is embellished with each telling. The story of Hugh is later set to music, all right? That scholars have identified more than 21 versions of the ballad about his death. In the late 1300s, a century later, decades after the expulsion of Jews from England, you may have heard of somebody named Chaucer. You may have heard of his work called the Canterbury Tales. One of the tales tells of little baby Hughie, little Hughie. All right. I know I had to read this in high school, and I come across this anti-Semitic tale and did not know what to do with it as a high school student. Open to any questions on this piece of it so far. Okay, seeing, hearing none. 20 years before Hugh's death in 1255, a new element had been added to the charge of ritual murder against the Jews. They were now accused of murdering Christian children for their blood. All right, like other charges of ritual murder, the blood libel is a lie that led to the death of countless Jews over the centuries. In the 13th century, most people in Northern Europe believed that blood had enormous power. Christians and Jews alike believed that the soul was contained in the blood. And the Bible plays that out as well. As a result, Jews are forbidden to eat blood. Okay? Dietary laws require the draining of blood prior to eating. And so, one of the things we check, I remember growing up with this with my mom, and you go to the kosher butcher, and he had drained the blood. Or if you bought liver, you had to broil it to remove all the extra blood. Blood is forbidden to be eaten by Jews by biblical law. Even today, observant Jews are not permitted to eat so much as an egg that contains a blood spot. Again, I see my mom, and I do this too now today, but I see my mom in my memory. Each egg was broken into a glass to look for a blood spot before you poured it into a pot, because you didn't want the third egg to have a blood spot and have to throw away all 3 eggs. So you did one at a time. Jews who come into contact with blood are required to purify themselves prior to carrying out a mitzvah. They are considered tameh, impure, or they're in a state of impurity so that they can't engage in mitzvot, in acts of holiness. Nevertheless, God forbid facts should confuse anything. Nevertheless, on Christmas Day in 1235, Jews in the town of Fulda, Germany, were accused of murdering 5 children for their blood. A miller and his wife returned from church on Christmas Day to find that their home had burnt down and the bodies of their 5 children lie in the ruins. They and their neighbors immediately accused the Jews of this crime. Horrified, they placed the children's body in a cart, and they're going to carry them to the Emperor Frederick II as evidence of what the Jews have done. You have to realize at this time, people didn't go more than a few miles out of town very often. This was not a common journey. It was dangerous between people trying to attack them and animals trying to attack them. And they're not living in a country. They're living in little medieval towns where you have to travel one to the next, and the laws don't always apply one to the next. All right. And so it's dangerous to travel. For them to go 150 miles to the emperor's castle to tell their story to do such was a major step, and they would tell their story every step of the way. So they're spreading the rumors as they go. When they get to Frederick the emperor, he doesn't know what to think of this accusation. And he sends messengers to other European rulers asking for their advice, as well as sending for recent converts to Christianity to help them determine the truth. What's going on here? In an edict issued in 1236, Frederick summarizes what he learned from all these advisors. And that's reading number 3. Sandy Weiner, would you do the honors? Reading number 3.
Yes, sir. It is clear that it was not indicated in the Old Testament or in the New that Jews lust for the drinking of human blood. Rather, precisely the opposite. They guard against the intake of all blood, as we find expressly in the biblical law of Genesis, in the laws given by Moses, and in the Jewish decrees of the Talmud. We can surely assume that for those to whom even the blood of permitted animals is forbidden, the desire for human blood cannot exist. Moreover, they would not expose to danger their substance and persons for that which they might have freely taken from animals. By this sentence of the princes, we pronounce the Jews of the aforesaid place and the rest of the Jews of Germany completely absolved of this imputed crime.
So, Counselor, what is the 1236?
What is
Counselor, what year is 1236? What's the verdict, Counselor?
Probably no one believes this or gives any credence to it because
Correct.
It is contrary to mob mentality.
All right. Not guilty, absolving. Okay. Nonetheless, despite the emperor's orders, the mob rule continues, accusations continue. In March 1247, 2 Franciscans accused the Jews of Valray in France of crucifying a Christian children and using his blood for ritual purposes. Some Jews are tortured, others killed. It's a constant pattern. The survivors of this experience appealed to Pope Innocent IV. So now they've gone to the emperor, now they're going to the Pope for help, and he condemns those accusations in strong language, as does his successor, Gregory X, who in 1271, he issues the following statement. Rhoda, do you have reading number 4?
Yes, I do. Do you want me to read again? Okay.
Oh, did you read already?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to do it again, but I think other people might want
I
to.
apologize. I didn't think you read. Okay, Sara, do you have reading number 4? Please.
Okay, since it happens occasionally that some Christians lose their Christian children, the Jews are accused by their enemies of secretly carrying off and killing these same Christian children and making sacrifices of the heart and blood of these very children. It happens too that the parents of these children or some other Christian enemies of these Jews secretly hide these very children in order that they may be able to injure these Jews and in order that they may be able to extort from them a certain amount of money by redeeming them from their straits. And most falsely do these Christian claims that the Jews have secretly and furtively carried away these children and killed them. And the Jews offer sacrifice from the heart and blood of these children, since their law in this matter precisely and expressly forbids Jews to sacrifice, eat, or drink the blood, or to eat the flesh of animals having claws. This has been demonstrated many times at our courts by Jews converted to the Christian faith. Nonetheless, very many Jews are often seized and detained unjustly because of this. We decree, therefore, that Christians need not be obeyed against Jews in a case or situation of this type, and we order that Jews seized under such a silly pretext be freed from imprisonment, and they shall not be arrested henceforth on such a miserable pretext, unless, which we do not believe, they be caught in the commission of the crime. We decree that no Christian shall stir up anything new against them, but that they should be maintained in that status and position in which they were in the time of our predecessors from antiquity till now.
Okay, so you've got the emperor and you've got the pope. All right, you've got pretty good. If you were to try to position yourself in the situation of logic, at this point you've got all the proof text you need. That's not relevant. Okay. Gregory's statement, however, suggests some of the reasons the accusations were readily believed. For one thing, life was extremely difficult and dangerous, as we talked about before. For most people, children in particular were vulnerable to accidents and illnesses. And grief-stricken parents may have wanted to blame someone for the death of their child. Accusing outsiders, what they got to do was to deflect any blame they might have placed on God. Okay, we all know this. When someone dies, we try to figure out what's God's role in it. Okay, by having an outsider, I take that argument off the table. In addition, I don't have to take any responsibility myself. I might have set up a dangerous situation, the kid dies, etc. I don't have to take responsibility in process either. Gregory mentions Christian enemies of Jews who falsely claimed that their children were dead in order to have the Jews arrested and executed, or to demand money from them before then turning around and finding their children safe. Okay, extortion is always a reason. Finances. Perhaps some of these Christians owed money to a Jew. Remember, Jews were the money lenders. That's all they were allowed to do. And they couldn't repay it. Isn't this a convenient way to erase one's debt? Around the more outlandish assumptions that underlie the blood libel, and this one I've done some research in the last week and a half. I did some reading. I'll share with you some of what I found. Was the notion that Jewish men menstruated and therefore required Christian blood to replenish themselves, or alternately, that they needed to make up for the blood that they lost during circumcision. Okay, so let's take a look at this. In a history text of approximately 1220, Jacques de Vitry claims that the descendants of those who cried out, this is a quote from Matthew, "His blood be upon us and our children at the crucifixion." Okay, so there's a blood claim there at the crucifixion in the book of Matthew 27:25. They've become unwarlike and weak like women. This is not my statement. I'm not going to go there. Which is why every lunar month they suffer, as it is said, a flux of blood. Matthew. In support of the claim, he cites a modified version of Psalm 77, in which in his modified version, it says, "God smote them in the hinder parts and laid upon them a perpetual reproach." His reference to a flux of blood every lunar month presents the nucleus of what became more pervasive and far more pernicious in the history of Christianity, the anti-Jewish attack of the myth of male menstruation. It's rooted in this concept of divine punishment and the crucifixion of Jesus. Also reflected in the allegation, around the same time, you have a text by Caesarius of Heisterbach that the Jews suffered their bleeding not monthly, but according to him, annually on the anniversary of Christ's death. The verse in Matthew is 27:25. And then you have an introduction, and they begin getting involved in Greek and Arabic sources on natural philosophy and medicine at the universities during the 13th century. and an alternative version of the myth begins to establish itself, one which no longer is satisfied with seeing this as supernatural, but rather there's a scientific understanding now to it. You can't trust science, obviously. The view is put forth that the Jews suffered from bleeding hemorrhoids caused by an abundance of gross ingested blood. And this is explained with their melancholic nature, which is evident by the fact that they hate societies, they have a pallid complexion, and they're naturally timid. Well, naturally timid after 100 years of being beaten, one could understand. In addition to this abundance of melancholic blood, which was said to be produced, this melancholic blood was produced by the Jews' gross nutrition. They don't eat good. They don't eat well. Their abstinence of wine. So if you're not a shikker, then you have a problem. And their lack, you'll love this, their lack of bloodletting. Okay, you got to get rid of that extra blood somehow. Both menstruation and hemorrhoids were described by medieval physiologists as having strong functional similarities. Both were ways of purging the body of surplus blood. And in so, the leap from hemorrhoidal ailments to the concept of menstruation is not a giant leap. Okay. Fascinating way. Again, you don't need proof. Okay. You just need a belief. All of these blood libels take on a life of their own. In the 19th century, we're talking about only 200 years ago, one of the leading essayists in England, Charles Lamb, wrote the following. He says, "I confess that I have not the nerve to enter the synagogues. Old prejudices cling about me. I cannot shake off the tale of you, of Lincoln." This is 200 years ago. 1973, our lifetimes. A book of Ozark mountain folk songs, was printed, which included a ballad inspired by the Jewish ritual murder of Hugh of Lincoln. In it, a Jewish woman is described as inviting a young Christian boy into her house, whereupon, reading number 5, Roslyn, do you have the text? (1973).
She pinned a napkin o'er his face and pinned it with gold pin, then called for a vessel of gold to catch his heart blood in, to catch his heart blood in.
Okay, so we're talking about 40 years ago, 47 years ago. This is our lifetime. I don't think there's anybody here under 47 if I look around the room. All right. Aside, it's interesting that the blood libel may actually have strengthened Jewish identity in a very unusual, unexpected way. The early Zionists, Achad Ha'am, contended that the blood libel was actually of some psychological benefit to the Jews in that it helped them to resist internalizing the world's negative portrayal of them. Jeff, would you read number 6? This is from Achad Ha'am in the early 1900s.
This accusation is the solitary case in which the general acceptance of an idea about ourselves does not make us doubt whether all the world can be wrong, and we right because it's based on an absolute lie.
Right. One cannot make it from the inside. One can very comfortably walk away and say that Jewish men don't menstruate. All right, we're comfortable with who we are. These kinds of accusations, in a sense, strengthen Jewish identity. Whereas much about the Holocaust, I'm just reading. I'm writing a paper about John Ameri, who basically describes Jews beginning to accept all the negative imagery that was portrayed upon them. He was a survivor from the camps. And here you have an example of something that actually enabled Jews to maintain their identity strength. because they understood that there was no truth. There is no truth anywhere in it. All right, so the third accusation that I want to get to today is the desecration of the host. In 1215, could the fairy tale of Hansel and Gretel? That's a question worthy of research. I don't know the answer, but it's a good question. So in 1215, the Fourth Lateran Council accepts the doctrine of transubstantiation as church dogma. What this is saying is that the wafer that they distribute each Sunday and use at Mass is miraculously transformed into the actual body of Jesus. It's not symbolic, it is real. All right, this is one of the differences between Catholicism and Protestantism. It's one of the reasons that Protestantism broke off. Catholicism accepts that it is not a symbolic wafer, it is actually transformed into the body of Jesus. All right, shortly thereafter, at the Easter Passover season, some of these Christians are now accusing Jews of desecrating the host, the wafer. These charges, as silly as it sounds, lead to torture and murder of thousands of Jews. Since Jesus becomes present through the wafer, the reasoning is, would the Jews who had once crucified him not wish to torture and kill him again? That's the logic. In 1243, only 28 years following the Fourth Lateran Council, the first host desecration accusation occurs near Berlin. The entire city's Jewish community is burned alive for torturing a wafer. In Prague in 1389, 150 years later, the Jewish community was collectively accused of attacking a monk who was carrying a wafer. Large mobs of Christians surrounded the Jewish neighborhood and offered the Jews the choice of baptism or death. Refusing to be baptized, 3,000 Jews are murdered. In 1510, 26 Jews are burned and 2 beheaded for reportedly desecrating the host. It is not until the rise of Protestantism that this particular superstition cease. All right. However, that said, we have at least a charge as late as 1836, a charge in Romania of host desecration. I'm going to move on to poisoning Christians. By the way, let me start out by saying that's false, in case anyone had any questions. If a king did not die on the battlefield, which was very common, and he had a Jewish physician, there is nothing surprising in hearing that the doctor is accused of poisoning the king. This was a common accusation, not a good profession to be in. In actuality, almost every medieval Jewish doctor in Europe was endangered. In 1161 in Bohemia, 86 Jews were burned as punishment for an alleged plot by the Jewish physicians to poison the populace. 1610, we're talking much later now, the medical faculty of the University of Vienna declared that Jewish physicians were bound by Jewish law to kill every 10th Christian through the use of drugs. Dr. Portnoy, any wisdom here?
Yeah, I've killed my share. You know, I don't know.
There you go. Okay. Martin Luther, thank you. Martin Luther said that if the Jews could kill us all, they would gladly do so, especially those who profess to be physicians. They know all that is known about medicine in Germany. They can give poison to a man of which he will die in an hour or in 10 or 20 years. Go prove this is not true. 10 or 20 years, okay? They understand this art thoroughly. I guess it's part of medical school. I must not have heard of that about that class. The libel that the Jews were continually plotting to poison the Christian world had particularly tragic results during the Black Plague of 1348 to 49. We'll talk about that plague as we begin the next class next week. It kills about 1/3 of Europe's population and is blamed on the Jews, despite the fact that Jews also died of the plague. Jews were increasingly seen as a powerful threat to Christianity because until the 10th century, Judaism was a faith that encouraged outsiders to convert. All right, I want you to hear that again, because we're known as a religion that doesn't engage in conversion. I had when I was in Dallas, a woman came up to me, a Black woman came up to me at one point and said, and was very angry at me and saying, "Why don't you want us Black people to convert? Why aren't you out trying to convert us?" I don't know what to say to her, because we don't go out and try to convert anybody, is the answer to the question. There's no targeting involved. But the reality of it is, Christians have killed us for trying to convert people, and so we stopped doing it. It's a very pragmatic response. In 1215, Pope Innocent calls together 400 bishops for what I mentioned before, the Fourth Lateran Council. In addition to the transubstantiation I spoke about, the council issued 70 edicts in an effort to unite Christians and stamp out heresies which were considered threats to the church. Jews are not allowed, according to this document, to hold public office, since this offers them a pretext to vent their wrath against Christians. Another edict dealt with Jews who converted to Christianity. Church leaders were to keep those Jews from returning to Judaism. All right, you'll hear that when we get to the Inquisition, all the more powerful. This is a function of the Fourth Lateran Council of 1215. The final edict in this document, Lori, do you have the text? Is text number 7. All right, if you would read text number 7 for us, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
In some provinces, a difference in dress distinguishes the Jews or Muslims from the Christians, but in certain others, such as a confusion has grown up that they cannot be distinguished by any difference. Thus it happens at times that through error, Christians have relations with the women of Jews or Muslims, and Jews for that they may not, under pretext of error of this sort, excuse themselves in the future for the excesses of such prohibited intercourse, we decree that such Jews and Muslims of both sexes in every Christian province, and that at all times shall be marked off in the eyes of the public from other peoples through the character of their dress. Moreover, during the last 3 days before Easter, and especially on Good Friday, Jews shall not go forth in public at all, for the reason that some of them on these very days, as we hear, do not blush to go forth better dressed, and are not afraid to mock the Christians who maintain the memory of the most holy passion by wearing signs of mourning. This, however, we forbid most severely, that anyone should presume at all to break forth an insult to the Redeemer. And since we ought not to ignore any insult to him who blotted out our disgraceful deeds, we command that such impudent fellows be checked by the secular princes by imposing on them proper punishment, so that they shall not at all be presumed to blaspheme him who was crucified for us.
Okay. By the end of the 13th century, most European Jews were forced to wear badges or distinguishing clothing. The aim was to humiliate the Jews by setting them apart from their neighbors, but the effect is twofold. On the one hand, it reinforces the concept that the Jews are a threat. They're easily identifiable, and as easily identifiable, they become more vulnerable as well. I'm going to, because of time, there's just so much material, unfortunately. I'm going to skip the debates and I'm going to go to the expulsions. Just one word about the debates. The debate is really a poor label. It's a disputation, meaning the goal of these debates, it wasn't an open forum that you'd go to a debate and listen to two sides of an argument and make up your mind. The goal was to prove to all the listeners that Judaism was false and that Christianity was the true religion. They brought in rabbis, but basically told the rabbis up front, be careful what you say, because your life, your family's life, the Jewish community's life can be at stake here. And so the ability to truly debate was very limited. You had a Paris debate, you had a Barcelona debate. There were a number of debates that were staged. Such great Jewish luminaries as Nachmanides were involved, but they knew very well that their lives were at stake in everything they said. And so things were often couched. Nachmanides took a little bit more liberty, but it resulted in some really difficult moments in his life following it. All right, so I want to go to some of the expulsions. And when we think of expulsion, we think of Spain, and that's not where I'm going today. I'm going to deal with that next week. I'm going to start out in France. The First Crusade, as we've spoken about, led to a number of accusations, the blood libel, etc., in which many Jews were burned or attacked in France. Immediately after the coronation of Philip Augustus in 1181, the king orders the Jews arrested on a Saturday. All their synagogues are despoiled of their money and their investments. In the following April of 1182, he publishes an edict of expulsion. But according to the Jews, a delay of 3 months for sale of their properties. Immovable property, however, such as houses, fields, vines, barns, wine presses, he confiscates. All right. They're told to get out. And what's going on here is a filling of the royal coffers. All right. And once they are filled, they're sold for cash. You see what is going to be a repeated pattern. It is a financial undertone that is causing this. You have a demonized people and you have a way to make money off of them. 17 years later, Philip Augustus, who is now in charge, he recalls the Jews to Paris. Why does he do this? This is not because he loves Jews. He learned that the Jews are an excellent source of income from a fiscal point of view as money lenders. We bring them back. They're the only ones allowed to money lend. Let's bring them back. Not only does he recall them to their estates, he gives them state sanction and to operate in banking and pawnbroking. He places their businesses under his control, determines the legal rate of interest, and obliges them to pay to have his seal affixed to all deals. And of course, it was then taxed. So what he's done is he's brought them back to make money himself. All right. 1234, Louis IV frees his subject from a third of all debts that are owed to Jews. So now the Christians no longer have to pay their debts. Only 2/3 of their debts are now responsible. It's forbidden to imprison Christians or to ask them to sell their real estate to recover the money they need to pay the debts. And what he's looking to do is blow. So the first rule brings them in because they'll engage in usury. He gets rid of the opportunity to engage in usury. All right. And in 1234, Louis orders, at the urging of Gregory, the Pope of Gregory IX, the burning in Paris of 12,000 manuscripts of the Talmud and other Jewish books. And in order to finance his first crusade, Louis orders the expulsion of all Jews engaged in usury and the confiscation of all their property to pay for the crusade. Constant pattern. Towards the middle of 1306, the treasury is nearly emptied, and the king decides to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. He condemned, once again, the Jews keep coming back and they keep being thrown out. He condemns the Jews to banishment and takes forcibly possession of all their property, real and personal. Their houses, their lands, their immovable goods were sold at auction, and the king was reserved any treasures found buried in their dwellings for his own belonging. I love this. What's the king's name? Philip the Fair.
Oh, what?
Fair.
F-A-I-R. Fair, F-A-I-R. He's a fair king. Philip the Fair intends merely to fill the gap in his treasury and is not even concerned with the well-being of his own Christians. Because what does he do? In changing the debt and saying the Jew, you don't have to owe the money to the Jews anymore, all he does is transfer all the debt to himself. So I now respond, you now owe all your money to me. It's good to be the king. I remember hearing that in a movie.
Yes, very good line.
Yes. Their final expulsion, this keeps happening until 1394. On September the 17th of 1394, Charles VI, publishes an ordinance in which he declares in substance that it is, for a long time, he's been taking note of the complaints provoked by the excesses and misdemeanors committed by Jews against Christians. And therefore, he issues an irrevocable law and statute that no Jews shall remain in his domain. 1394, final expulsion from France. There's widespread anti-Semitism going on in Europe. Medieval England was particularly anti-Jewish as well. An image there of the Jew as diabolical, yes, I know the movie, diabolical figure who hates Jesus results in the ritual murder accusations, and it spreads to England, it spreads to Wales, it spreads to Scotland, and there are riots in which Jews are killed and murdered, most famously in 1190, when over 100 Jews are massacred in the city of York. And it only gets worse as the 13th century progresses. In 1218, England becomes the first European nation to require Jews to wear some kind of badge or some kind of mark upon themselves. Taxation gets increasingly worse. Between 1219 and 1272, 49 levies are placed on the Jews alone, the constant source of money and money and money. The first major step towards expulsion takes place in 1275 with the Statute of Jewry. The statute outlaws all usury. So first you put the Jews in this position where they can't do anything else, and then you forbid them to do it, and gave the Jews 15 years to adjust with no other occupations to go into. By 1289, King Edward I finds himself in deep debt. You can guess how this plays out. He summons his knights to impose a steep tax to the entire population. But to make the tax more palatable, he offers essentially to expel all the Jews from England. The heavy tax was passed. 3 days later, July 18th, the Edict of Expulsion is issued, and it's widely popular. And so the Christian population accepts the higher tax rate because it comes with what they perceive to be a benefit. The expulsion goes smoothly, although there are some horrific stories. One story is told of a captain who takes a ship full of Jews to the Thames while the tide was going out. And so they get off the boat, the tide is out, convincing them to go for a walk with him. He loses them, heads back to the ship before the tide comes in, and he leaves them all to drown. Between the expulsion of 1290 and their formal return in 1655, there is no official trace of Jews on English soil. All right, so today we've dealt with the lies, the libels, all the kinds of things that have been said throughout Europe We dealt with the expulsions from France and Spain. I just mentioned in passing the disputations that happened. I'm open to questions. Next week, we'll pick up with the Black Death and the occurrences of Spain. All right, any questions in terms of anything we talked about today or comments?
Yeah.
What year did you say there were no Jews in England?
From 1290 to 1655.
You
Of course,
said,
someone- What's that?
you said something about Jews were accused for converting Christians. Was there any time in history that Jews actually did that?
Well, yeah, until about the 10th century, Jews converted. Yeah, there are many stories of people actively going out and trying to convert, or you would, and the accusations continue to be made that they will continue to do so. So I have to imagine even going on, there's some isolated moments of such. Okay, but yes, it was like any other religion. It was a conversionary religion until it became too dangerous to do so.
Oh.
And there are a number of articles that were written in the late 20th century, in particular in the Reform movement, where there was a discussion of should we be beginning to try to do more outreach and convert people.
Okay, thank you.
Were there similar circumstances out? Yeah, well, the answer is less so. Again, most of the Jews were, the great majority, again, we're talking about Christian anti-Semitism. And that's happening primarily in Northern Europe. All right. When we get to Muslim anti-Semitism, you'll see it happening elsewhere. The source of reading number 8. I'm not sure. I'm going to have to go back and look. I honestly don't remember. I apologize. I should have made better notes. I wrote this about 4 years ago and I don't remember. At that time I knew and I don't remember. Yes, Gail.
Yeah, so, the Jews were expelled from England. So Jews being expelled from France, etc. Where were they expelled to? England was not an option anymore.
So you'll see a lot of them, go to Spain. A lot of, Spain at this time is a haven. They flee to Muslim lands essentially.
Yeah.
Because it's a better life for Jews. It's, you may have a secondary class status, but you're not under threat of death.
Thank you.
Was Nachmanides exiled because of a disputation? Did he win one or?
Well, obviously winning and losing is in the eye of the beholder. He certainly was far more successful than his predecessors. He had been upfront guaranteed some liberty in terms of, his ability to say so, but it didn't play out that way afterwards. And so, whether or not it came from the officials and he fled, or whether it came from the mob mentality, the reality of it is he fled. All right, my friends, we will continue. Just a couple notes. I'm gonna send out a new calendar in the next week, and I'll try and have it for you as well. I'm switching 2 weeks. I am going to teach the last week in December. All right. Most people are available wherever they are at this point. There's a week in January in which I'm taking a class online taking a class online. And so it's like 5 hours a day. So I'm going to take a week off instead and teach there. Once we return in January, we're also moving back to 10 o'clock. So that we don't conflict. We've had sisterhood meetings. We've had other education classes. We've had this Sunday morning is prime time and everybody wants it.
Right.
All right. The classes the Shabbat morning classes that were traditionally offered on Saturday had been moved to Sunday. They're moving back to Saturday. Ultimately, sisterhood will do their sessions at 11. And so I'm going to move back to 10 so that we can accommodate everybody and people can attend as many different things as they would like. My instinct says there'll be 6 more things when the good news is we've got lots going on. There'll be 6 more things that along the way will conflict because we have limited options. Sunday morning is a great time, but we're doing our best.
Can you share the calendar with Facebook?
What's
Can
that?
Can the calendar be shared on Facebook too, for whoever's not on your mailing list?
I'll put it on Facebook. I'll put it on a mailing list. We'll put it in the online on the webpage, and we'll send it. We'll put it in the morning Boker Tov. I'll try to get it out. If you can send it to anybody who you know as well, the more avenues, the better, so that no one gets left out. Okay. Thank you all. It's a pleasure.
Thank
all right.
you.
I'm going to go sing with
Thank
the
you.
kids.
Thank you. Terrific
Bye-bye.
class.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Right. Yeah.